This is News for Scotland on the Scotland Channel. Scottish scientists have developed a groundbreaking new scanner which could change the way breast cancer is diagnosed and treated. A team from the University of Aberdeen, which invented the world's first full-body MRI scanner in 1980, made the breakthrough which could see fewer surgeries and more individually tailored treatments offered. Working with NHS Grampian, scientists have developed a prototype version of the new field cycling imager, a scanner used to examine breast tissue of newly diagnosed patients. They discovered that the FCI scanner could distinguish tumours from healthy tissue with more accuracy than the MRI scanner, which was invented at that university decades before. This new discovery could change the way millions of people with cancer are treated. Around 15% of women currently need a second surgery after a lumpectomy, but this new technique could reduce the need for more operations. Serious doubts have been raised about the full $200 million promised for investment and an alternative future for Grangemouth by Keir Starmer's UK government in England. Will the $200 million ever materialise? As previously reported on News for Scotland, the UK government said it will put $200 million towards investing in an alternative future for Grangemouth while still continuing with its £600 million investment in Antwerp, Belgium, where Grangemouth's owners Ineos have another plant. 400 Grangemouth workers have already received their redundancy notices and thousands more jobs are threatened in the wider supply chain, despite the fact that Grangemouth is profitable. The campaign group Believe in Scotland says it has serious doubts that the full $200 million will actually materialise or be used as anything other than a boost for large companies, given the co-investment with the private sector nature of this funding. Scotland, which is a major oil-producing nation, will be left with no oil refining capacity, which the group says is madness. Despite producing virtually no oil, England and Wales have 5 refineries, none of which is under threat of closure. The UK government is still finding 3 times the sum it has promised to Grangemouth to help the owner of Ineos move to a new site inside the EU following England's disastrous vote to leave the single market in 2016, dragging Scotland out with them, which is costing Scotland about $3 billion a year in lost trade. Believe in Scotland says that losing its only oil refinery while England and Wales have 5 means that oil from Scotland's waters can't be refined here, which will allow unionists to make the case that Scotland is too dependent on England to be successfully independent. A claim by Scottish Secretary Ian Murray that Scotland is no longer on the sidelines in Westminster has been attacked by independence blogger Leah Gunn Barrett. Does Westminster care about Scotland? Miss Gunn Barrett made her comments in response to Ian Murray's regular column in the Edinburgh Evening News, where he suggested that Scotland now has 37 Scottish Labour MPs at, as he put it, at the heart of government in London, all representing Scotland's interests there. But Miss Gunn Barrett listed all the things Labour has done for Scotland so far, such as letting the Grangemouth refinery close, although it's profitable, promoting what she described as a GB energy scam. That's a shell company with a brass nameplate in Aberdeen, but a chief executive in Manchester, who says it won't meet the pledge to employ 1,000 people for 20 years, and Labour's failure to cut energy prices when they pledged to cut your energy bills by £300, but the price cap has just risen by 18%. She says it shows that Murray thinks Scots are idiots, when the only idiots are the ones who voted for the Unionist Party, said Miss Gunn Barrett, who writes in her blog Dear Scotland. In his column, Ian Murray claimed that since July, Scotland's interests have been championed time and time again by the new Labour government in England. He says, we've established GB Energy to be headquartered in Aberdeen, which will put Scotland at the centre of the industries of the future, Mr Murray wrote. He went on, we promised that when it came to Grangemouth, we wouldn't walk on the other side of the road. Murray also praised proposals announced by Anas Sarwar to revive primary care and to drive down waiting lists in Scotland, without mentioning that waiting lists are longer in Labour-run England and Wales than they are in Scotland. Describing Murray as the Viceroy, Miss Gunn Barrett agreed that 3 Labour ministers he praised in his column were all at the heart of government. That's the UK government. What has the inanely grinning Michael Shanks, Minister for Energy, done for Scotland, let alone Grangemouth? Let it close with the loss of 3,000 associated jobs, even though English Labour voted to save the jobs. Shanks said that he was confident their workers could find other work. As for GB Energy, which she described as a shell company with a brass nameplate in Aberdeen and a chief executive in Manchester, it will depend 100% on the private sector and mostly foreign government-owned generators to stump up the funding, which she said sounds like another PFI initiative, a private finance initiative fraud. English Labour pledged to cut energy bills by £300, but a price cap has since soared 18% since last July. That's because Starmer's government refuses to address the root cause of high energy prices, which is the privatised energy sector, where profiteering is rife, marginal cost pricing, where the price of your bill is set by the most expensive fuel, which is gas, and by national rather than regional pricing. Regional pricing would mean that Scots would have the cheapest electricity in Europe, she said. Instead, Shanks, the Viceroy, and 33 other Labour MPs voted to cut the winter fuel allowance for pensioners. Meanwhile, fuel poverty grows in energy-rich Scotland. Ms Gunn Barrett also hit out at English Labour MP for Lothian East, Douglas Alexander, who in 2009, as the MP for Paisley, had to repay £12,000 that he fraudulently claimed for his second home while raking in rent for the same property. She says it turns out he holds 2 ministerial portfolios, trade and cabinet office, so he'll be too busy jetting around the globe to worry about Scotland, she said. His official trips from July to September took him to Riyadh, Oman, Thailand, Laos, and in January he was in South Africa and Botswana. There's a phoning interview on Alexander in the Holyrood magazine, which is now owned by Lord Ashcroft's UK media group, Political Holdings. This claims that Douglas is a changed man, but apparently not changed enough to support the UK joining the European Customs Union or a single market, which would benefit Scottish businesses slammed by Brexit, she said. On a recent trip to Drumchapel to hear about extreme poverty from community organisations, Kirsty McNeill, the Parliamentary Under-Secretary for Scotland, who Murray insists is making Scotland's voice heard, Ms Gunn Barrett said that the English Labour's approach to reducing poverty is to let charities deal with the problem because the UK government can't or won't lift a finger. When will Scots realise that their nation will always be in the sidelines as long as it's in the failing UK? Asked Ms Gunn Barrett. The union was designed to sideline us, 543 English versus 57 Scottish MPs, to make it easy for the UK to subjugate our people and to steal our resources, which it has been doing for 318 years. And because the Scottish colonial administration hasn't shown any willingness to extricate us, many people are in despair, she claimed. A documentary on energy prices entitled The Second Great British Energy Heist is available to watch now here on the Scotland Channel. The devolved Scottish Government has been accused of surrendering to Westminster in what has been described as an attack on Scottish democracy by the UK Government in England. The campaign group Respect Scottish Sovereignty has petitioned the Scottish Government to incorporate the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights into Scots law, that's the ICCPR. This would formally recognise that the people of Scotland are sovereign over their politicians and government, and would force politicians here to take account of the will of the people. Respect Scottish Sovereignty has received 2 written responses from the Scottish Government directed from Constitution and from SPICE, that's the Parliamentary Research Unit, regarding their petition PE 2135. While the Scottish Government concedes that the Scottish Parliament has the authority to implement international law and bring it into Scots law, it asserts that these obligations only apply to devolved matters. It also asserts that implementing the ICCPR would extend Holyrood's powers. But according to Leah Gunn Barrett of Respect Scottish Sovereignty, the Scottish Government response was signed by a UK civil servant, Dominic Munro, who reports to Whitehall, and not by the Scottish Constitution Minister, who is Angus Robertson. This speaks volumes, she says. The SPICE briefing paper claims that because the European Convention on Human Rights, the ECHR, has already been enacted into UK law, It already covers the rights of the ICCPR, but the European Human Rights Convention omits direct political rights, that's referendums and initiatives, which are in ICCPR Article 25. Without these, Scottish citizens can't exercise their sovereignty. Spice also claims that implementing ICCPR is outside of Holyrood's competence. The group says that's not true because Section 25 of the Scotland Act 98 clearly states that the ICCPR is not reserved. In effect, Westminster has delegated legislative competence for implementing ICCPR to Holyrood. Co-founder of Respect Scottish Sovereignty, Henry Ferguson, has told News4Scotland that the Westminster-backed Scottish Government reply is an attack on Scottish democracy, and he urges people across Scotland to lobby their MSPs and the Scottish Government to recognise the sovereignty of the Scottish people by implementing this legislation into Scots law.
Well, it's been a very interesting process, very democratic process, because surprisingly, after the petition was published, the petition to implement the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, after that was published on the 3rd of January, the Scottish Government and the Parliament Research Service had 30 days to reply to that petition. They both replied. The Spice, the Research Service, was pretty good reply and missed out a lot of detail that should have been in there. But the Scottish Government reply was from the Directorate for Constitution. It wasn't even from the elected representative of the Scottish people, Angus Robertson, MSP. He declined to sign the reply. But be that as it may, we now, Respect Scottish Sovereignty, we have a period up until the 20th of March to reply to these two official comments, which gives us the last word, which is extremely democratic. And the CPPC, the Parliamentary Committee, will meet on the 2nd of April to decide, with looking at these three documents, what the next steps will be. Now, our reply is ready. It's going to be filed on the 6th of March, and we're going to widely publicise that reply, and it's going to refute all the way down the line the allegations, I don't know if you'd call them allegations, but the affirmations of both the Spice, the Parliamentary Research Service, and particularly the government, that the Parliament doesn't, and government doesn't have the competence to do what we say they do, and they quite clearly do have that competence. They have the competence to implement the covenant. They have the competence to hold a referendum, and these two things combined can give the Scottish people access to the rights, the human rights of the covenant. These human rights are supported by the Scottish Human Rights Commission. The inaugural chair of the Scottish Human Rights Commission is in writing to say that human rights covenants, UN treaties can be implemented by the Scottish Government, the Scottish Parliament. So we're on pretty solid ground. We're happy with where we are. We're happy that we're getting the message out. We were at a conference there here in Edinburgh on Saturday. We did some good publicity, and we think we're in the process. The concluding paragraph, in fact, in our reply to these two papers, the concluding paragraph is that Scotland's under attack. We're under attack by the UK Civil Service. If you read the UK Directorate of Constitution paper, that makes statements which the Scottish Human Rights Commission says that the UK government should not be making. The civil service is interfering in a Scottish domestic matter related to devolved. It's this petition that we're requesting is a devolved petition. The UK civil service has absolutely nothing to say about that. But there they are. They signed the reply on behalf of the Scottish Government, and we're taking issue with that, and we are maintaining that that's a direct attack on Scottish sovereignty.
Scotland's only independent supporting newspaper, The National, has republished the Macron report, which the UK government in England kept secret for more than 40 years, fearing its contents could lead to Scottish independence when the oil was first coming ashore from Scottish waters in the early 1970s. The report, commissioned by the then Labour government led by Harold Wilson, said that Scotland would be so rich as an independent country as to be embarrassingly wealthy, in Macron's words. Wilson's government immediately classified the report and buried it for nearly 4 decades as the UK government in England continued to trot out the line that Scotland was only running a deficit and could not survive without bailouts from England in order to justify the continuation of the Union. The report was written by Professor Gavin Macron to assess the impact of Scotland's newfound oil wealth on support for independence in Scotland, and Macron said in a covering letter, "The first part goes through most of the usual arguments which have been used against the nationalists in the past with fairly convincing effect, and the second part sets out the sort of economic strategy which an SNP government might try to follow, indicating both the dangers and the possibilities." Macron added that the report was classified secret and given only a most restricted circulation in the Scottish office because of the extreme sensitivity of the subject. He noted that the discovery of oil would feature widely in the SNP's election material at that time, and that the purpose of the report was to reassess the economic arguments for an independent Scotland in the light of the discovery of oil, something he said would be a watershed in Scotland's economic and political life. Macron acknowledged that the Scottish nationalism has been much more concerned with economic prosperity than nationalist movements in other countries, and that the main cause of discontent is Scotland's unsatisfactory economic performance over the last half-century as part of the UK, especially the persistent unemployment and net immigration, above all from the west of Scotland. Poor social and environmental conditions, especially in and around the city of Glasgow, accompany this now outdated UK economic framework and are as much of a source of discontent, he noted. Despite regional policy and the efforts of planners, these problems have not been overcome, nor do they look as if they will be in the foreseeable future. The SNP have therefore based their campaign on the assertion that Scotland would be economically better off independent, and it's for this reason that budgetary estimates have always featured so large in the controversy. The importance of North Sea oil is that it raises just this issue in a more acute form than any other time since the Act of Union was passed, said Macron. And Macron noted that the SNP had accused the UK government of giving Scottish oil away to the international companies ridiculously cheap. It's now, up to now, much of the Scottish public may have regarded the SNP figures as pretty wild, and they have been publicly condemned as such by UK ministers, he said. But authoritative support for the charge that the UK government has failed to do a satisfactory bargain with the oil companies is provided in the criticism by the Public Accounts Committee, which so far remain unanswered, he noted. The example of Norwegian policy on government revenue from oil likewise shows up the failure of the British, he added. The National newspaper published the report in full in its February 27th edition without a paywall. A spokesperson for the National said, "We believe it's vitally important that everyone can access it." Tourism is a huge industry in Scotland. It includes 9% of all our businesses, that's about 1,600 firms, and employs around 240,000 people. We already have a tourist tax for overnight stays, which the Parliament brought in last year, and the discussion has now moved on to a cruise ship tax to help those local authorities where cruise liners dock in the summer. Our busiest cruise ship ports are Greenock, Leith, Invergordon, Lerwick and Kirkwall. Around 1,000 cruise ships visited Scottish ports in 2024, bringing in 1.2 million passengers, and that's an increase of almost 400,000 a year compared with 2019. Only 2% of Scotland's visitors arrive by cruise ship, but in the Orkney and Shetland ports that figure can reach 80%, with many ships carrying more than 1,000 passengers. Cruise is the fastest growing segment of the worldwide tourism business. Clearly, the destination ports benefit from visitors' spending, but also have to pay for any improvements needed out of their local budget, and that's the thinking behind the tourist taxes. They make sure that short stay visitors put something back into the local economy. Like the hotel's tourist tax, any decision to levy a charge on cruise companies or their passengers would be decided by the local authorities involved. The Scottish Government discussion paper on the cruise ship levy looked at examples from Barcelona, Dubrovnik, Amsterdam and Venice. In Amsterdam, for example, the aim of the cruise ship levy was to limit over-tourism, with many Amsterdam residents complaining that their city, with 18 million visitors in 2018, was getting overcrowded. The levy currently is set at €14 per passenger, and it has had the desired effect in one sense. The total number of ships docking in Amsterdam's ports has reduced, but this is mainly because they've switched to Rotterdam. In Barcelona, the aim of the tourism taxes, both in hotels and cruise ships, is to balance the needs of tourism with the quality of life of the city's population. Councillors here have told the Scottish Government that they are worried that the tax might scare potential visitors away, but Barcelona still has them coming in large numbers in spite of the levy. In 2023, Barcelona welcomed 803 cruise ships and nearly 3.6 million passengers. This surpassed the pre-pandemic totals by nearly 14%. In 2024, the Barcelona levy was €4 per person. The Scottish Government has recently published its discussion paper on the cruise ship levy, and this goes through the different ways the tax could be imposed on different sizes of ship, with possible exemptions for young people or disabled passengers. The idea now is to gather opinion from local authorities in the port cities and also take the views of companies working in the cruise and general tourism industries. You're also invited to join in, so if you've got a point to make on a possible cruise ship tax, contact the Citizen Space on the Scottish Government Hub. That's www.consult.gov.scot. The public consultation is open till the 30th of May this year. And now let's look at the economy. The GDP, or the gross domestic product, is a common statistic to record growth in the economy. Now, last week, Scotland's chief economist released the figures for 2024. Overall, Scotland's economy grew by 1.1%. That's compared to 0.9% for the UK economy. Growth sectors were in services, agriculture, forestry and fishing, while production output fell by 0.9% and construction contracted by 0.1%. It's difficult, of course, to get more growth while Scotland remains outside the huge European single market, but Scotland doesn't have the means of getting back into Europe as long as the Starmer government in London refuses to reverse England's disastrous decision to leave Europe in 2016. Private planes owned by Scotland's biggest private landlord, Anders Povlsen, who has been praised by environmentalists for his rewilding projects, which is undertaken on his land, has made more than 1,000 flights in the last 4 years, according to an investigation by DR, the political broadcaster in Povlsen's native Denmark. Private planes operated by Povlsen's commercial airline Blackbird Air have flown at least 1,115 trips since 2020 and have included flights to the holiday island of Mallorca and to cities including Paris, Stockholm and Oslo. Blackbird Air mostly leases the private jets out to other companies and individuals both in Denmark and abroad, so Mr. Povlsen may have only been on a small number of these flights himself. However, 42 of these flights were to Inverness Airport, close to the sprawling Highland estates, owned by Mr. Povlsen and his company. His company confirmed that he was on board some of these. A series of flights were made back and forth between Denmark and Inverness in June 23, shortly before Povlsen celebrated his 50th birthday at Alduri Castle on the banks of Loch Ness. Pop star Lionel Richie was reportedly flown in via Inverness to perform at the birthday bash. The head of Oxfam Scotland, Jamie Livingston, is reported to have described the use of private jets as the ultimate symbol of carbon inequity, as a form of egregious climate vandalism. Private flights are considered to be between 5 and 14 times more polluting per passenger than commercial flights, and 50 times worse for the climate than taking the train. Oxfam has called for the introduction of a tax on private jets, which it claims could have raised over 20 million last year. Oxfam Scotland accused the wealthiest people and corporations of continuing to pollute with impunity as climate disasters wreak havoc on communities across the world. There were thought to be nearly 13,000 recorded private flights involving Scotland's airports last year. Concern that taxpayers' money has helped to fund human rights abuses are to be investigated by the Scottish Government. This follows Scottish enterprise funding to firms with links to states accused of war crimes, such as Israel, despite hundreds of due diligence checks being made. The due diligence checks procedure was introduced by Scottish Enterprise in 2019, following criticism that funding had been given to weapons manufacturers supplying countries with poor human rights records or accused even of war crimes. None of the firms checked had failed in their applications for public money, it was revealed, leading to some MSPs expressing concern. Now, the Scottish Government has promised to review the human rights checks procedure conducted by Scottish Enterprise, with a pledge by Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes that the Government would ensure that the most robust processes are in place. The Scottish Enterprise due diligence checks are designed to assess whether a company has been, as they say, associated with human rights abuses anywhere in the world. Despite their checks, it's understood that Scottish Enterprise has given taxpayers' money to firms linked with countries who are accused of human rights violations in wars in Gaza and Yemen, as well as 2 Scottish universities linked to illegal settlements in the West Bank. Greens co-leader Lorna Slater said the new test needs to be far more robust than anything we've had to date, as no human rights checks worthy of the name would allow grants to companies who are complicit in genocide. Amnesty International UK added that with no company ever failing one of the checks, they're not credible and clearly require overhaul. New figures show that as of the 31st of December 24, the families of 326,000 children under 16 were receiving vital support from the Scottish Child Payment. Over £1 billion has now been paid to parents and carers since this payment was introduced in February 2021. The Scottish Child Payment is unique to Scotland and provides financial support for families helping with the cost of caring for a child. It's a weekly payment currently worth £26.70 for every eligible child that a parent or carer looks after while that child is under the age of 16. While visiting Craigour Park Primary School in Edinburgh to talk to parents who get the Scottish Child Payment, Scottish Social Justice Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville said, "Eradicating child poverty is the Scottish Government's top priority and a national mission." She continued, modelling published in February 24 also estimates that the Scottish Child Payment could keep 60,000 children out of relative poverty this year. As we reported a couple of weeks ago, Scotland used to have the worst poverty figures in the UK, but now that unfortunate accolade goes to the poorer areas of England. The head teacher of Craigour Park Primary, Sally Ketchen, said, "We welcome payments like the Scottish Child Payment and the Best Start grants. We can see the real difference this money makes to families in our community." And that rounds up our stories for this week. Join us again from 7 p.m. next Friday for independent news without the mainstream media bias. Support us by subscribing to the Scotland Channel on youtube.com/the Scotland Channel. I'm Hugh, thanks for watching.